Welcome to Detangle, where we untangle the complexities of life, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, Dr. Kinjal Goel, a psychologist and a writer. Today on Detangle, I'm joined by Professor Somak Raychaudhury, an astrophysicist who has spent decades studying galaxies and the large-scale structure of the universe, and who is a deeply respected academic leader. He has led major institutions like IUCAA in Pune and is currently the Vice Chancellor of Ashoka University. Beyond the science and the titles, his work sits at the intersection of curiosity, education, and how we train young minds to think across disciplines. I'm so honored by your presence on my show, sir. Thank you so much for joining me on Detangle today.
Thank you for having me. I'm very honored.
So, sir, let's dive in. There are so many questions that I have for you. There are so many things that I want to learn from you. I'm sure this conversation is going to take unexpected twists and turns, but let's begin.
Right.
So it's very difficult for me to introduce you properly because of all the things that you have done. Would you be able to take a couple of minutes and just tell us all about your education and work in a nutshell?
Well, I am an astronomer, astrophysicist, and I came to this role in a quite a deliberate path. I was very interested in the universe and the stars from a very early age. Probably prompted by Carl Sagan's Cosmos, which came out at a time when I was in school, and also Jayant Narlikar's amazing writing around the time in the 70s when I was in school and college. So I went to Presidency College in Kolkata, where I did physics. And as a result, I got in touch with quite a lot of prominent physicists and astronomers in the country. I went to Oxford to do a second undergraduate degree, where I formally started learning about the tools of astrophysics. And I'd already had a telescope, but then I learned to properly look through professional telescopes, etc. While I was in England, I had the fortune of doing my PhD in Cambridge, which is one of the best astronomy places at a time when very prominent astronomers were working there, including Stephen Hawking. Then I, had several positions across the world, working in various important projects. In the US, I worked on a NASA project to build a satellite called Chandra, named after the Indian astronomer Chandrasekhar. Then I taught at the University of Birmingham in England for over a decade, physics and astronomy. And slowly realized that I wanted to build institutions. I wanted to work on reshaping academic institutions. I've got very interested in liberal arts education, where you learn a lot of subjects together to figure out how complex problems can be tackled in many ways.
Right.
And so I came back to India in about 13 years ago to rebuild my old institution, Presidency College, into a university, 200-year-old institution. And I was there first dean. Then I to become the director of India's top astronomy institution, which is in Pune, in IUCAA, as you said, which got me involved into quite a lot of global astronomy projects. We could talk about them. And then I came to Ashoka University, where we are setting up a premier institution where, again, this concept of liberal arts and sciences is the predominant theme, so that students learn horizontally a lot of different subjects and skills in order to become very complete human beings, rather than be very specialized in one field from the very beginning. So that's my journey, and I've quite and so this is a very interesting mix of research and in science, but also getting involved hands-on in educating young people, which I enjoy both parts of it very much.
How fascinating. I mean, when we talk about rocket science, it's actually an idiom, It isn't rocket science, we
Yeah,
say, but you've actually lived your life with it.
yeah. I often call myself a rocket scientist. I've seen rocket scientists who are not that clever. So and of course, to be a very successful rocket scientist, you have to be clever. So it is true. It is kind of a euphemism, but also it what it hides underneath the word is that it is one of these things that I talked about. It is a way of dealing with very complex problems
Right.
where there isn't a single preparation that helps you do it. So a rocket scientist has to be many things
Hmm.
at the same time, and that is, I think, quite representative of what the modern world is becoming. I think, in general, moving forward, young people will have to cope with a world that demands skills in many, many different areas.
Absolutely.
And that's what you need to build a rocket, but that's what you need to do a lot of things now.
Like we say now, the future is not just unknown, it's unknowable. The speed at which things are changing. We can't prepare for anything. We just need to be prepared to change and to adapt.
As a researcher, I find that fascinating. I find it actually quite good because if we find that knowledge ends at a certain point and everything is known, which in the history of mankind, people have thought from time to time that there is not much more to learn. We've learned
Hmm.
everything. Then we're out of business, and I don't think we would get there ever. The whole point of acquiring knowledge and understanding our surroundings is to discover more questions than answers. And then you start investigating those questions. And that's what fascinates me about my line of work, is that there is no place where you can sit back and think that, you've achieved everything,
Hmm.
because it always leads you on to new pastures.
True. So you've led so many institutions. You have played so many roles. You have steeped yourself in research. You are a teacher. You're an institutional head. So most of the roles that you took on, I'm sure you knew what to expect, but I'm sure there were lots of surprises along the way. So tell me what surprised you about which of these roles and how.
Well, I mean, there are surprises, of course, as you say, in every field.
Hmm.
As a student, because I went into subjects that are not normally taken by people around me. When I was growing up, like everybody else in India, people were preparing for the IIT exams, and and there were certain fields that people got pushed into, like the professional fields. And I'm very happy that my parents did not push me into doing certain fields that were the most acceptable ones. Went into an area that I felt passionate about, but nobody around me was doing astronomy or anything like that. And so um, I really got into pretty surprising areas in there. For example, as a young astronomer, even when I was a student, I found myself traveling to very exotic places on Earth where the world's largest telescopes are.
Wow.
Telescopes need to be in places which are away from human beings, and typically on tops of mountains in arid areas where there is very little rain. So you end up in places like Hawaii or Chile or in the Australian desert or at the southern point of South Africa, the Cape, or on top of the Himalayan mountains. And I was traveling to all of these places as a young person. So that surprised me, the fact that one could actually enjoy all aspects of being a researcher, the travel to exotic places, but also to know the people who um, actually work with these instruments all over the world. Um, you get introduced to different cultures. I didn't expect, as a scientist, to to do this, because my laboratories were in very interesting, culturally interesting places.
Hmm.
Then, as an educator. I had seen my father as an educator, as a professor in a college, and how he related to his students. I found that my work with students in large campuses, both abroad in England, where I taught, and in India, to be rewarding in many different ways. As a scientist, one engages in the laboratory with students. Again, being an astronomer, there is this very romantic aspect of looking at the sky together, and bringing a very, very foreign subject, a very unusual subject to the students was very rewarding. But the most rewarding thing, I think, an unexpected thing, happened when I became the director of IUCA in Pune. Because soon after I became the director of IUCA, but 2 weeks after I started my job, the first gravitational wave was discovered, which was something that was predicted by Einstein 100 years ago. And Einstein had said nobody ever would ever be able to see one.
Wow.
And it was discovered, and that changed my life in many ways, because we then very quickly realized that we could build a gravitational wave detector observatory in India. And so we, together with the so-called LIGO observatories in the US, started thinking of one. And I went right up to the Prime Minister and the cabinet to see whether the government could fund something like this in India, because this was such an amazing opportunity. And we worked with the government, and finally it is happening now after many years. We are setting up one of the top scientific observatories in the middle of India, in Maharashtra, with full government support. And it has taken, almost 10 years to get here. So that kind of took us by surprise. The other thing that took us by surprise was around the same time, India launched through ISRO the first space telescope called AstroSat. Again, I got very, very involved with it, and I've now worked very closely with ISRO on many projects which are to do with science. Before this, ISRO was much involved in various other things to do with weather, climate, communication, remote sensing. But now ISRO has become a major player in world science, as you know, the missions to the moon and Mars and various other observatories in space. And that was a big surprise in my professional life, to get involved in such amazing world-leading work. I grew up thinking that if you wanted to be a scientist, you had to go abroad, and all the big opportunities in foremost science is abroad. But that's not true anymore. You can be in India, be a student and a scientist, and do path-breaking, world-leading work. And that's what I've been involved in the last 10 years. And that's been the biggest surprise of my life, I think.
How lovely. I have no words to even express how awesome, literally awesome this sounds, because this is what actually makes us feel like, there's so much to do, there's so much being done. All we need to do is live with intent and know what's happening around us. I mean, like you said, you took the road less traveled and it took you straight to space.
Yes.
I mean, how beautiful is that?
Yes, and I didn't know it was taking me there. That's the thing.
Amazing. Sir, you've been a mentor, like you said, to many students. Your father was a professor. He taught his students. I'm sure you have understood the mindset that has changed over the years, and not simply academically. But how do you think students are now relating to ambition, pressure, uncertainty? Do you see a shift?
Of course, things are shifting quite a lot. What has changed, I think, from the time when I was a student and what students do now is both the journey and what students expect out of education. So it's what to look forward to, what lies beyond. I think people have a much clearer picture of what one expects out of education, and I think, and also the tools and the information that's available has changed. I mean, when I was a student, I did the subject that I was doing for the love of it, but I spent most of my time finding the information that was needed. Search for the right textbooks.
Correct.
Because the net was not there at that time, and I mean, you could even not. I'm old enough that during the time when I was a student, you couldn't just walk into a library and photocopy pages. You had to copy them down by hand. And so the way we acquired knowledge was very different from what the students do now. Now, knowledge in the form of information is available to all students. From the internet, from the availability of general information is there. But it creates its own problem because there's too much information. And what the student now needs to learn is how to discern from good information and bad information. You need to figure out what you need to learn and what not.
Correct.
And as a result, as I said, the whole point of life now moving forward is to make sure you have the right skills to cope with whatever your profession will be. So the way students learn now is very different from students used to learn, say, 50 years ago or 100 years ago. I mean, when my grandfather became a lawyer, his education essentially ended when, by the time he was 25, he'd become a barrister, and then he used that education for the rest of his life, and he did not have to go back to university or to any school.
Right.
Whereas now, we cannot afford to stop learning because in our lifetime, lots have changed. I mean, the way we encounter information, we learn the news, and we use devices has changed so much in our lifetime, in our generation, with the computer and the internet, and now mobile phones and devices. And these will continue to change. I mean, we are seeing how in the last couple of years, the advent of AI has changed our lives. So I think we will have to have a way of education which is going to be changing, and we'll have to continue to learn how to cope with it. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so interested in interdisciplinary and multiple field education. Here at Ashoka University, for example, students come in and they do not start on a subject as their major or honors till the middle of their second year. Everybody has to do a bunch of courses which we call foundational courses. They have to learn critical thinking. They have to do subjects like literature and the world. They have a course called Great Books. They have a course called The Principles of Science. They have a course called Quantitative Reasoning. They have a course called Mind and Behavior, which is basic psychology. They have to learn basic environmental sciences. Everybody has to do it. And then they decide on which subject to specialize in. And that means that they learn the value of the breadth of education before they choose what they want to do, rather than they be pushed into a very narrow field. This, I hope, will encourage them to later on look out of their chosen field and see where they can make connections, which is very, very important in the ever-changing world. I think this is fundamentally different from how students used to acquire knowledge before. It is also important because the information available is so varied that the focus now is to know for a student where to go for the right kind of information. There's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of fake news. There's a lot of AI-generated things that are not even anywhere near real. And I think when I was growing up, I did not have this problem. We had standard textbooks from which we knew that there were encyclopedias, there were newspapers that came in the morning that were well trusted. And our choice was not as much as students have now. And it's pretty bewildering to be a young person now to figure out how to navigate all this.
I think what I love best in this is what happened earlier, even when I was a child and I was studying, is that we consumed information, and now, like you said, we encounter information, which means we have to decide whether we take it, leave it, fight it, question it. We can't simply
Yes,
consume it. It just explains everything. I had found
yes,
it
indeed.
extremely intriguing, sir, when we were talking about how the concept of time was being explained at the university last time we spoke, and how time was explained from various perspectives. I would love for you to delve into that space with me.
So that's one very interesting idea that we came up with. I mean, I teach a course in the foundations. As I said, we have students who they have to take foundational courses before they specialize. In the
Right.
foundations, I teach a course called Time, where we look at how things change and how our concept of time is rooted in both scientific and cultural principles, um, which is very interesting because if you look at how biologists see time, they see it as the basic underlying factor of change, of how species evolve over very long periods of time. But then there are short term changes that are happening during the day. There are insects that live only a day, but there are organisms that live hundreds of years. And so they, and in the genetic makeup uh, of their existence, they know how to cope with time. As an astronomer, I've learned how what to make of time in terms of how to measure time, how old the universe is, how old the Earth is. These things were not known till in the last century.
Hmm.
Even 100 years ago, we did not know how old the Earth is, and
Right.
now things are making sense. And then, if you bring this together, so in our course we bring our way of measuring time, our way of perceiving time, and our way of defining time in scientific terms. And then the perception of time is another thing where psychology comes in, because
Hmm.
the way we perceive time is very psychological. When we are bored, it feels like time is not passing at all. When we are very interested, time passes very fast, and that itself leads to our trying to understand the brain and how brain perceives time. And the body perceives time in its own way because we have a body clock. We know when
Right.
to sleep, when to eat, and when to digest, etc. As you can see already, if one picks a theme like this, then concepts from many, many different subjects come together and make you understand reality. In the previous system of education, where you picked up one subject, you would only have one aspect of this. And so I look at this as the famous story about the, the blind people and the elephant, where one tries to touch one part of the elephant and trying to understand what the elephant is like.
Hmm.
And if you touch the ears, you think the elephant is like a fan. If you touch the tail, you think the elephant is like a rope. But you really need, for many people, to give you information, collect information together, skills from many different ways to understand what the shape of the elephant is. And and time is one such concept. There are many such concepts that one needs to learn to figure out how we perceive reality. I found it fascinating in class because what we do in class is also ask the students to then go and research on other aspects of time that we haven't covered in class. And they come up with very interesting ways. And we learn from them.
Really?
So I've learned a lot from my students in the last few years
How
in
nice.
terms of their experience as well.
Amazing. And this also reminds me of something an artist had told me on the podcast. He said if you have your nose sticking to the painting, you will only see one color. The minute you step back, you'll be able to
Yeah.
appreciate the whole painting. So, yes, art and science are not that far away. So, tell me on a personal note, You have spent years in research, you've also spent years teaching. They're such completely different activities. I mean, research can be lonely, it can be done alone. There are a lot of times when you have to spend time with your work by yourself, internally oriented, but with students, it's always with others. You're gaining energy, you're losing energy, you're learning, you're teaching. How different is it for you as a person to handle so many different kinds of work?
Well, research and science can be lonely
Mm.
because there is one aspect of it that is introspective. That is, you need to think about things, and so one thinks in times of isolation. But more and more, learning and research in almost all subjects is now turning out to be collaborative,
Right.
and I like that. I welcome that because it is very, very social. It's a big social activity. I'll give an example of you. The world saw how we coped with COVID 5 years
Right.
ago, and when we had the pandemic, which was quite a sudden event and an unusual event, it was heartening to see how the world came together in coping with it. And so we found that people collaborated even though we had so many restrictions on physical interaction. The world came together in trying to find a solution to a lot of the problems that the pandemic threw to us, right?
Absolutely.
From detecting the virus to vaccinating against the virus to cure to then the long-term problems of mental health, of the extreme distress in hospitals. And I found that my colleagues, who were essentially astrophysicists and space scientists, were working on designing ventilators. They were designing apps to figure out how the disease is spreading. We went and worked with the city's system to figure out how to restrict the spread of the disease. So this showed that how science, in order to cope with the crises we have around us, has to come together. There is, it is no longer the picture of somebody sitting in a corner of a lab mixing liquids or chewing a pencil. We work in fields where there are papers that come out that have more than 1,000 authors, and
Really?
just shows that, yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I've seen a paper recently where there were 2,500
Oh, wow.
authors. So people come together from across the world to actually work on things together, and I like that. And so this is, I think, has become a norm in many big fields, that people know that individual brilliance has to be combined with interaction with others. And this is necessary because, as I said before, most problems are now very interdisciplinary. And so it requires a bunch of skills which one person cannot have. So one Newton or one Einstein sitting somewhere trying to solve a problem is very unusual now. So in order to deal with something, I would need a bunch of engineers, a bunch of physicists, a bunch of chemists, a bunch of biologists, and maybe a bunch of psychologists and anthropologists come together. And so that is happening already. So that, I think, is interesting. However, the role of pure thinking has not changed. And one needs to have a mixture of introspection as well as collaboration. But I
Right.
think both are very, very important. Both are very important.
So, which also brings me to my next thought. AI has changed the way research is done. AI has changed the way results are achieved. Sometimes crunching really, really large bodies of data took a lot of time, which now has completely evaporated. Now we do in seconds what earlier took years. How do you think students can upskill themselves to remain relevant in a world where research has taken on such a different shape?
So I think the advent of AI changes things in ways where we are going into uncharted territory, and we have to be careful. It is true that
Right.
AI as a tool is very useful in both teaching, learning, and research, but it also throws up quite a lot of ethical issues, copyright issues, and interesting issues in the way we do research. and teaching.
Right.
I think as teachers, what we are concentrating on now is to make sure the students learn how to use AI responsibly and understand the implications of what they're doing. Because AI does now and will continue for the foreseeable future to throw up responses or answers which will have to be verified, which will have to be which have to be understood. There now AI is quite good at doing routine things like write code and summarizing small things, but to actually use AI as a tool of research means that one needs to often use it for very routine things. AI to take AI into uncharted territory and to do new things to create knowledge is still a very risky business. And also, one needs to understand how to use the AI tools properly because it requires a lot of input to guide the software into the right directions. And so we are back to where I was talking about learning how to think in terms of formulating a problem, which requires a lot of critical thinking, and also figuring out how to progress into trying to solve a certain problem or to address a certain issue. Normally, students don't learn this in university or in school. People work in formulaic methods, and that doesn't work for AI because if the AI tools are not told what the problem is in a very explicit way and guided through the methodology, then the AI tools turn up to be not very useful. So we are already doing this. We are encouraging students to use AI tools rather than prevent them from doing it. But making sure people understand how to, for example, assess the output of AI tools, whether to believe them or not, and also how to best use them for learning purposes. Students use AI for retrieving information, for summarizing books or papers. However, you cannot really move away from the actual personal involvement in trying to find what you want in a particular source or in a particular book.
Perfect.
Yeah, so AI is being used for companionship and also for counseling. And one needs to exercise caution in using these tools as well, because AI often reinforces what is being asked or being told, rather than engage in a dialogue where constructively a thought is processed. And as a result, it can lead one to various harmful effects. And so this is something that I think we are learning how to use these tools. And for both teachers, researchers, and also students and parents, this is now very new territory. And one needs to be very careful and make sure we use AI in a responsible and ethical manner.
Perfect. So let me take you into a more personal zone now. I'm going to take you through a rapid fire round where you're not allowed to think twice. Every answer comes really quick.
Okay.
Your favorite book?
Oh, that's a hard one because there are lots and lots of books that one reads, and for different reasons. I if you think of a book being used for comfort, I would say when I'm relaxing, I would go into P.G. Woodhouse's stories and novels and read them for comfort. If one things about learning about the universe. I'm very much a nonfiction reader, and I read a lot about science and evolution. So Stephen Jay Gould's books, for example, on evolution are my most favorite books.
Super. Your favorite movie character?
Uh, Difficult to say. A favorite movie character. My favorite movies um, are very complex psychological movies, but I also like movies that are very popular. My favorite director has for a long time been Akira Kurosawa. And I would say maybe my favorite movie character would be Toshiro Mifune's character in The Seven Samurai.
What is your biggest pet peeve?
Grammar. I let's look at say how people write. Of course, being a teacher, a lot of common grammatical mistakes really irk me. For example, the use of the apostrophe in pluralizing words, or the difference between its and it is. That I think would irks me most. The use of the apostrophe in writing.
Super. So, one thing that you believed in but no longer do?
That's an interesting question. There are many things that as a young person, I thought were very clear cut and one sided, and there are many things that uh, were without both sides of the story. So I think, and that has changed over the years. I've started to see that many concepts have both sides to it. Even concepts like education, where just the acquisition of education doesn't make you a complete person. And so I've seen the effects of education, where acquisition of education doesn't make you an educated person. Where I thought as a young person that there was no bad side to it. Democracy, I thought, was something that was unequivocally something that improves a country. I can now see that it can work both ways, and so there are concepts that you start seeing the complexities of, and that I find very surprising in how just experience shows you how things change.
Your most prized possession?
My most prized possession, I think most of them are very personal. I think my most prized possession is my father's notebooks
Oh,
of
wow.
his thoughts about, because he was a professor of literature, and he wrote down a lot of things of his thoughts about both Bengali literature, which he taught, and world literature, which he used in his teaching in classes, but was never for public consumption. And I inherited it, and I think it's I've learned a lot from it, and it's a very personal but very prized possession.
How nice. Thank you for sharing that. Now, sir, tell me, this is my favorite question on the podcast. I've asked this question to every guest throughout these 5 seasons. I love the answers that I collect. We've all heard of a physical first aid box, something in which we keep our painkillers, antiseptics, etc., for those minor cuts and bruises. But what if you were to personally keep a mental first aid box, something that would immediately make you smile on those low days?
I think for me, it's music, my favorite music. I listen to a lot of classical music, Western classical music, and Indian classical music. I have my
Okay.
favorite pieces that I always go to when I have to relax or I am stressed, and so that first aid box will have to have some of my favorite pieces of music. I have images that I find very soothing in terms of some favorite photos from my life and people I like. So images are very important, and they're often images that capture certain moments, which when I was happy. when I was of people, many of whom are no longer around, but moments of my life. And I think it is also important in that first aid box to have activities in terms of games that one plays, maybe word games um, or games to do with pictures, with I don't know, images, where one can actually involve in an activity to get the mind into an activity that is different from what has been distressing them. So I would like, some games that one can play in that first aid box. Some people, of course, like physical sports, which help them, in their mental rehabilitation. But I think that's it. I mean, I think routine, some routine interaction with music, with images, and with activities is very important, and that's what my first aid box will have.
That sounds amazing. So, before I summarize our conversation, before we come to a close, I always leave the floor open to my guests. Do you have any question to ask me as a psychologist?
Of course. I mean, of course, one of the major problems we have as educational practitioners is to is to try and figure out, in this rapidly changing world, and we deal with students who are at a certain age, who are actually transitioning from being adolescents to being adults.
Right.
What do you think is more important for a student of this age um, to survive? What is your counsel for them?
I think it begins at home. We have lost something very important in homes. We can't expect parenting to go wrong and then the child to thrive in an environment at this age. What I'm trying to say is there was a time when parents treated each other also with respect and kindness. What is happening now everywhere is people only want to raise children who are extremely accomplished. Everything has to be right, gentle parenting. All of this, which focuses so much on the child and takes the entire joy out of the life of the adults who are living in that house, is counterproductive as a child grows up. So you'll notice if a child has been brought up with, let's say, kid gloves, or has been raised as a very fragile object,
Yeah.
they will not be very resilient when they come to college. But if a child has been allowed to lose, allowed to face boredom, allowed to not get, what they wanted at exactly that time, delayed gratification, all these things come in handy when they enter this phase of college. So I think it's fairly safe to say that all this begins at home and not just in that time in college. A lot of us are trying to fix things which were broken much earlier. So my counsel is hopefully parents will take this more seriously, start taking yourself more seriously, enjoy your life as adults and not just the child that you're trying to raise. A child is important, but it need not be everything in this scope of the universe, so to say. So don't orbit around the child, let the child find their own orbit, if that answers your question.
That's very interesting, but thank you very much for saying that. Thank you.
So this has been an amazing conversation. Like, we started off saying we don't know which turns it's going to take. I have personally never met anyone who has lived life in such a different way. I'm intrigued. I'm extremely, extremely fascinated with the work you do. And first and foremost, thank you for giving your life to something which is so important. Unless people give their lives into education, into research, we will never progress as a society or as a country. So, from my entire audience, a huge thank you. Also, thank you for sharing your insights because these are very important. Like you said, when you were younger, you came across some books and that got you interested in physics, and this is how far you've come. Maybe someday someone will hear this podcast and say, "Oh, at the right age, I heard Professor Somak's podcast, and this is exactly what I wanted to be." So I hope we are able to inspire others through your story. Thank you so much for taking the time and doing this with me.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been wonderful talking to you, and I really hope this can be heard by many people. And if somebody gets inspired by my story, that would be wonderful. Thank you very much.
All right, sir. Thank you so much.